On today's episode, we're talking about tracking performance at your agency, what to measure, and how the right metrics can inform your decision making.
Ook, so this is an interesting topic and something that you and I have talked a lot about. So, when it comes to tracking performance at an agency, it's very easy to go overboard. Just start tracking everything you can and build a fancy dashboard with a lot of inputs and numbers. There's actually benefit to having less. Whittling it down, a dashboard or whatever report you're doing, to an easily digestible number of key performance indicators and metrics that help us make better decisions. And so today I thought it'd be great for us to just kind of share what kind of things we track in terms of performance across our Barrel Holdings agencies. Also, why these numbers particularly, and how we think about decision making based on these metrics. So maybe we can go dive in and share what we do.
It's an important distinction to think about. Metrics can be measures, so they report on what happened in the past, versus lead measures, which you're trying to project the future as much as possible. So let's start with the lag. First off is revenue. And when we think about revenue, we try to break it down into recurring revenue versus project revenue. And also how much of the revenue came from existing clients versus new clients. Some of it is distinguishing, how much is this almost a stable base of revenue that's recurring every month that you've sold in literal retainers versus the project revenue could be a little bit more lumpy. So you can see where you may have sold in a big project and that lasts for X amount of months. And you can see the fluctuations in the business. And in general, we try to move towards having more of a base of recurring revenue so the businesses are less reliant on winning new business. All right, the next is gross margin. So when we talk about gross margin, it's revenue minus all the costs to deliver the work. So typically, in our instance, people costs, salaries, freelancers. And there it's setting a goal for what we want to see on that. And that really reflects how profitable are the projects that we're running.
It speaks to operational efficiency, right? In terms of, hey, do you have a capable team that knows what they're doing, able to get things done on time in a satisfactory manner for clients? And so I think gross margin is a great example of reflecting that. And then on the flip side, pricing, it reflects pricing too. Mm-hmm. Like, did you charge enough for that project so you have enough margin at the end of the day to cover the cost of your people for that particular engagement? So I think that's a good one to track.
The next is EBIT. So looking at beyond gross margin, what are all the SG&A costs in the business? So anything from rent to software to travel and anything else that you use to kind of run the business. It's important to kind of separate those two because this is more about expenses that typically are either, it fluctuate a bit, but some of it is pretty consistent month over month. And here, this is room where you may make decisions on reducing SG&A spend based on the performance of the business.
Yeah, so a big one is teams went remote, for example. So get rid of an office cost, which is a fixed monthly cost. And so that has a huge impact on SG&A. So then the EBITDA number goes up. On the flip side, like you can be staffing up on the marketing side, maybe on the sales side as well, partnerships, all those things which are not related to the billable work, the work that is on the delivery side. So that can increase the SG&A expense line and then the EBITDA might go down. But the bet, when you're making those kind of investments is that, hey, the revenue might grow because you're able to increase the number of leads, increase revenue in the long run. And so it's kind of a balance. Like it doesn't, a lower EBITDA and higher SG&A doesn't necessarily mean you're running it poorly, a business. It could also be reflective of certain investments you're making.
The next metric is utilization. So looking at how the percentage of the billable work versus the total capacity of each of the team members. And we like to break that down also by discipline. So each of the discipline leads can say, how is my team doing against our goal? And for utilization, you can bubble it up to a company goal, but what we do is we look at utilization targets per role within the company. So it's just because a director at the company has a lower utilization doesn't mean it's bad. It's really based on what is the goal for that person and are we on track or off track.
This comes up a lot. Like people probably ask, what is a good utilization rate? Like how would we answer a question like that?
Depends on the makeup of your team. Generally speaking, we target 75%. plus as a blended number across the agency. But it really just depends on your specific business. Some businesses do trend higher, some maybe slightly lower, but it could work out with if your bill rate is extremely high, for example, and you could support a lower utilization number.
Yeah, I mean, I also think it has to do with the roles. Like you said, some directors might
Mhm.
have lower rates of utilization. That's okay, but then at certain levels, maybe a junior, mid level, you're probably hoping that they do 90, close to 100% utilization, right?
Yeah. So let's shift to lead measures. So looking at the future, maybe starting with utilization. I think forecasted utilization is one aspect of mapping out what do we think the team is going to be working on in the next week, 2 weeks, month, couple months, as far as you can go with some level of fidelity. And we'll call that forecasted utilization. So do you see like is there going to be a cliff where all you have 20 designers and 10 of them are going to be busy for the next week and then they're going to drop off and beyond that. So I think this is trying to paint a picture for the future.
Yeah, I mean, this is a huge one. So let's talk a
Mhm.
little bit about like what are some things that agency operators need to be careful about when it comes to forecasted utilization? Because I think there's a couple different things. Like a cliff is scary, as in like yeah, if you don't have enough new business lined up, it's very possible that like you need to act quickly and make cuts. But at the same time, as we've experienced in the past, sometimes that cliff is not always accurate, right? Things get I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, maybe you can speak to that, like things getting pushed and other things emerging all of a sudden. How can agencies mitigate against that?
Yeah, I think any of these things, it's making sure the data is correct before making any decisions on it. So when you look at forecasted utilization, you might assume that a project is ending at a certain date, but you go and you talk to all the project team members, the project managers, account managers, and they'll tell you, actually, no, that's not correct. It's actually going to run for another 2, 3 weeks. And we're talking to the client about a post-launch thing that isn't reflected yet. So it's just really important to make sure you can understand the full story of what your data is telling you before making any decisions there.
Yeah, and I think that gets at a really key point in all of this is that you can't take numbers purely as gospel. It's more signals and directional. And then I think if you're running the agency, you gotta dig a little bit deeper. You got to have the conversations and you got to surface, what's really going on because sometimes for whatever reason, maybe gaps or some delays in people inputting the numbers, or sometimes people just forget to, move things that can really skew the numbers to look a certain way. And so if you're not verifying that and having convos, like, you can make some really terrible decisions that can have a big impact.
Yeah, and the other thing is making sure you look out far enough. So if you just look at the next couple of weeks, and there might be a cliff where a lot of people are available, but 2 weeks after that, there's a ton of new projects starting up, and you'll need those people. So if you make the decision, hey, I think we're going to need to scale back, you might need those people in 2, 3, 4 weeks, and you got to make the call on whether to keep them or shrink your team. The next is pipeline. So this is from the typically biz dev team is tracking leads that go to calls or qualified leads, and then looking at the number of proposals sent, both from a kind of how many proposals and what's the dollar value, and then the win rate. So all of these give signals for are we getting enough opportunities that will lead to new work in the future.
Yeah, and this is something. I mean, we're looking at this number, especially like these numbers, especially every week, because I think it speaks to the strength of the business and like because it is a lead indicator. Like we can see if you have multiple weeks of zeros or close to zeros when it comes to leads or proposals sent. And of course, wins, there's going to be trouble on the horizon. And so I think if I had to just pick one, just of all of these, it'd probably be pipeline as one that just kind of gives you the immediate sense of like, okay, like what's the shape of this business? One of the things is not just new biz in general, but then also account activity, right? Like just the work coming from existing clients as well, because yeah, that's another way that agencies grow. Not all agencies get new clients every week or every month, but they rely heavily on existing clients to come back with new engagements or extended engagements, and just having that tracked is super important for decision making.
Yeah, and this is definitely a discipline that needs to go through the whole team is understanding. In that example before, if there's like a post-launch engagement or post-launch retainer from a project, that needs to be created as an opportunity in whatever system you're using to track it. so that you know that that's going to be coming into the future. So the pipeline, so that's from a kind of deal perspective. What we do after that is we convert that into a weighted pipeline by month. So for each deal in the pipeline, we'll say this is a 5 month engagement. We think we'll deliver the work evenly across 5 months. And then depending on the stage of that deal, we'll put a weighting on it. So we can map out given the current pipeline, what's the committed revenue and what's the future revenue? And with that, what do we think our next 2, 3 months is going to look like? And are we on pace and this kind of goes in parallel with the forecasted utilization, but this is from a numbers and financial perspective.
We could probably do a whole episode on this part because we're talking a little bit about like booked versus some recognized revenue. So, just some accounting stuff here. But I think it's very important that we just kind of underscore this. Let's say we sign, just to make it easy, like a 500K engagement. So from a bookings perspective, you go, cool, this quarter we booked $500,000 project. Awesome. But from a recognition, like how it might show up in the weighted pipeline view, how do we kind of think about it? And let's say this is a 8 month project. Let's say, so 62 $500 a month, let's say, over the next 8 months. How should we think about that in terms of how it shows up on the weighted pipeline?
We would break it down. And the other thing that's important is when that's starting. You could sign it now, but maybe it's kicking off in 2 months for whatever reason. In your future pipeline, you'll show a 2 month gap and then 62,500 for 8 months beyond that, month over month. And then, yeah, so you might see a gap in your projections, but as much as possible, having some kind of sense of when the work will be delivered is important because, yeah, to your point, 500,000 project sounds great, but you don't know, is that like a short engagement, long engagement? Is that a 24-month engagement that you just signed? The timeline is very important.
Yeah, and this is like super important because at the end this all flows down to some of the things that we've talked about in the past, like cash flow management and all those things. Because you can have a drought, let's say let's say you just have low revenue months, but then all of a sudden you sign a ton of business and you're like, oh, we're golden. But if those projects are not slated to start until months from now, you still might be in a drought and be in trouble, like not be out of the red until those projects start. I think this is like key for a lot of folks to think about is just because you sign stuff doesn't necessarily mean you're gonna be in the black.
Yeah. And the other layer there is if you sign a lot after a drought, you may need to step up even more than what you have now. So you may have to increase your cost basis to deliver that work in the future. So being able to visualize that is important.
It's kind of like going back up all the things that we just talked about. The forecasted utilization might pop, and then all of a sudden your gross margins might go down. So this is all stuff that as you get more comfortable kind of, and these are, just a handful of metrics, but like this is this core stuff and there's a lot of nuance to this. And so as you get more used to this stuff, you see how they play with each other, and then you can start to make decisions using these numbers. All right, cool. So that's the core. We kept it pretty simple. It's not that much stuff. This is obviously, there's a lot other things that we can measure, and we do. It's just, we keep it simple and we kind of think about these others as secondary numbers. And so maybe we could just quickly reel off some of the other things that we do consider and we layer on, but it's not just as closely looked at as the other ones.
A lot of these also depend on kind of the stage of the business and how large you are, the maturity of the business. Like some of this stuff, if you're a small shop, like a few people, some of this stuff may matter less versus kind of a more mature organization. So I'll kind of rattle off a few of the other ones that we look at. Accounts receivables aging. I think that's important to look at to make sure that you're actually getting paid by your clients. This is more for cash flow to make sure that on paper, from an accrual standpoint, you may be very profitable, but if no one is paying you and they haven't been paying you for months, it's probably a flag that you should take some action on. That's an important one to make sure on top of. Another one is client concentration. So being sure to understand how much of your revenue is coming from which client. So do you have one or two clients that make up 50% of your revenue? That could be a risk if that one or two clients ends up canceling a project, churning, and then how do you replace that revenue in the future? Another is net revenue retention. So that number is looking at of the revenue that you did in one period of time, how much of your net, let's see, last year the client did X amount. This year, how much of that revenue can you expect in this year, or does that grow or shrink? So it's just really showing, are clients growing with us or are they churning year over year?
It's important to note that like for one-time like project-based businesses, this number is going to be lower to some degree. And this is also why going back to our initial revenue metric, like if you can get clients on more of a recurring basis than year to year or, quarter to quarter, you can have a higher net revenue retention number because, they're usually like if they spent whatever 25K in a quarter and then the next quarter they're spending another 25K, then you basically retain them 100%. And even better, if you've added some work on top of that, you could be over 100%. So I think
Mhm.
this is like an important number that just especially as the business gets more mature and has some history to it, is going to be important to track.
And related to that is looking at the client retention from the specific number of clients also is important because net revenue retention can sometimes mask. There could be one client from the past that increases a lot that masks other clients decreasing. So I think that that number and who the clients are important to look at as well. On the employee side, looking at kind of employee retention as well, tenure, if you can track employee satisfaction through a variety of ways, I think that could be important to just show the overall kind of health and stability of the business.
Yeah, one of the things I like to think about is like employee satisfaction, and this could be like different, surveys you might send out, or just other measures. They might have like they have employee like NPS type of surveys you could send out too. That's almost like a leading indicator, and then you could argue that like the turnover numbers of like like how like what percentage of your employees do you retain year to year could be like a lagging one, and then the ultimate lagging one is like your Glassdoor reviews, and so like you can kind of look at some numbers there, and obviously if that number is suffering, then there's some kind of some kind of issues you might be having on the employee side.
Yeah, definitely. Last one here is project and client profitability. So we've kind of talked very high level at the, metrics, but breaking it down on a client level and project level of you may have scoped it for a certain level of profitability, going through doing debrief after each project and saying, all right, this is where we landed from an actual cost and delivery standpoint. And then as you do more and more projects or engagements with clients, you can say, all right, who are our most profitable clients over a period of time? And yeah, just make decisions as needed from there.
I think this is a good practice on a quarterly and annual basis. I think quarterly it helps you tighten up some of your ops and highlight where, hey, what can we learn from the project that was not profitable or we struggled? And then, on an annual basis, maybe looking at the clients and be like, hey, going forward, maybe, XYZ clients are not the best fit for whatever reasons, and the numbers back that up. These are worth looking at, especially as a leadership team, maybe with certain extended team members as well, to really hone in the strategy of what you're going to do going forward.
Yeah, I would say all of these numbers, there can be a lot of numbers to track, and it really comes down to what you can actually look at and take some action on, or else you'll get to a point where you're just tracking too many numbers that really aren't meaningful enough for you to affect any change. So I think that's a really important thing to take a look at. Review what have you been tracking, and do we still need to be tracking those numbers, or should we be tracking something?
I think a good like litmus test for this is like on a weekly basis or however often you look at it. So we like to look at some of these things weekly, but whenever certain metrics just become a bit wallpapery where like you're just glossing over it and like not really paying attention, but you're just like, all right, like we filled it out. And there's no kind of conversation or critical thinking around that number. It's probably not that important then, and it's probably not worth tracking. So it's almost like, all right, like we should probably take that out and then go back to the things where you almost have to feel like, hey, we need to look at those numbers because I need to know what's going on. And like there needs to be that pull, that sense of like urgency around looking at those numbers. It could very well be like some of these numbers, you just need to look at it on a much broader interval where you could look at it once a month and that's fine. Or you could look at it once a quarter, it's fine. Or you could look at it once a year and that's fine. And so kind of distinguishing the cadence at which you look at these numbers can also give you a better sense and not overload you on a week to week basis.
Yeah, for sure. In all of this, I think you mentioned this before, Peter, is like, yeah, metrics are, it shouldn't replace judgment. You have to look at this and decide, is it telling you the right thing that you're trying to make change on? And from there, it's your decision to make any act or take any action from there.
Yeah, awesome. So yeah, like we've shared a lot of stuff, but as with anything, we're always evolving as well. And there's other metrics and other pieces of data that I'm sure we'll evolve to collect and look at more closely in the future. But yeah, that's, hopefully this has been helpful to kind of share how we look at our agencies across the portfolio. So yeah, thanks for joining us. Take care.